hello, everyone. This is a panel on harnessing big data, which is kind of like everything that we're focused on, I think, in every sector of music rights management is how do we use this data? We have, as Morgan said, a stellar group of panelists. So I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to do the introductions. First, I'm going to go in order of how I see them on the screen. So first we have Luis. Luis Ruano is VP of Rights Administration at BMAT. He's an electronic engineer with a master's degree in sound and music computing, based in Spain. Next will be Nari. Nari Matsuura is a partner and co-leader of Citrin Cooperman's Music Economics and Valuation Services practice. Nari performs full-scale valuations of music publishing and recorded music assets on behalf of buyers, sellers, and lenders. Her valuations clients include major music funds, music publishers, record companies, private equity firms, banks, business managers, estates, and creators. Based in New York, I believe. Next, we got Kristen. Agee is a songwriter, composer, and founder of 411 Music Group. Kristen, or 411, provides synchronization licensing, custom score, publishing administration, and digital distribution for music rights holders. Kristen secures global partnerships for 411 and oversees creative and strategic business development. Based in Copenhagen, but here in LA for the moment. Then we have Connor. Connor Marks is VP of Publishing at APM Music. Prior to joining APM in 2009, Connor worked on the label and publishing side at EMI Music Publishing, Interscope Records, and BMG Music Publishing. So our panelists come from production music, from the valuation kind of audit space, and then I would say with BMAT, we're looking at tracking, detection, identification. So this is, in terms of all these data elements that we've discussed, we kind of cover it all with our panelists. So I'm just going to dive right in. If you have chat, if you have comments, if you have questions, if there's something you want us to bring up, please put them into the chat. As Morgan said, we're going to leave the last 10-15 minutes for questions, but if there's something in the chat that we need to pick up in context, we will. So the first question for Connor and Kristen, what are the tools that you use to organize, manage, and analyze the various data types, and how do they enhance your business?
I guess I'll start. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, and good to see so many people joining. So I feel like just as interested in this discussion as maybe everybody else joining, because it is like a weird time between like AI and everything that's happening now and these sort of archaic and manual processes that we all sort of, I think, still have as a big part of our business. So we're always analyzing like how we can make our business more automated and easier and user-friendly for like our team. And I feel like, you know, I don't know how in the nitty gritty we're going to really get into like the actual management tools that we're using, but we're, of course, like looking at like we have our search engines and our cloud-based servers, and, you know, that's a big like resource for us and our clients. And we're looking at search trends and our website data, like how many people are coming to our site. And to a certain degree, because we work with artists, we're looking at, you know, social media data, like how many followers do people have? Same with like DSPs, like how much are we streaming on Spotify and the artists we're looking at working with. But obviously the biggest, I think, component to our business is like turning our music into revenue. So we look at PRO statements and our licenses and performance data and, you know, where are we making our money and how do we like pivot our business to increase that revenue year after year. And of course, we do that through like a CRM, you know, database where we house everything. So, you know, there are a lot of different data points that we look at, and I'm lucky to have a team who sort of analyzes their own sector. So we have our asset management guy, who I think is on this call now, who analyzes all of our PRO data and performance revenue. And where are we making our money? And then we have a marketing manager who's looking at like where we can scale our business and how do we increase like the web traffic and social media traffic, and like who do we send our newsletters to. And so yeah, luckily like we have a team who's looking at all the data points, who should probably be talking about this alongside me. But yeah, it is a complicated space we're in, and like where are we heading with AI, and on the music side, but also like how do we use it as a tool in our business, with just random and useful like ChatGPT, for example, and like are we using that to write up our like websites and blog posts and whatever we're sharing. So yeah, there are a lot of different points to look at, I think.
Thank you. That's a lot.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry about your response.
Very cool. Yeah, and I'll hop in. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Kristen. I'm Connor. I've been at APM for 15 years, so I've had the benefit of seeing the evolution of some of these tools as they've changed, and I really got my start doing PRO registrations, and sort of became the subject matter expert at APM of where's the back end royalties for these syncs. And so I've been answering questions for 15 years on, okay, where's the performance money on these? Is this licensed? Should this be paid? And so in my history, I've seen, the old DOS-based AS400 systems, and we've worked on the counterpoint systems. And, now, our tech group is burgeoning. And essentially the tools that we're using now, which I'm really excited about, are creating a large database for all the different data sources that we have, that being the licensing data, the PRO statements, any detection data that we have. And what that looks like now for us is creating a data lake that is cloud-based, having a really smooth running ETL system to ingest all statements into this data lake, and then creating using a data visualization tool that sits on top of that data lake to be able to look at charts and graphs and draw information from, whether that be Tableau or Power BI, which is a Microsoft-based tool. But essentially what it always comes down to with me is my favorite tool in this space is Microsoft Excel. I'm always, digging in, exporting statements, exporting spreadsheets, creating pivot tables, and just looking, but always trying to, I come from I'm a composer background and a musician background, and I'm really interested in understanding how the money flows, and then making sure that the publisher and the composer gets paid at the end of the day. But I find it's really important to anything that I'm looking at, I like to have all of the information on. So whether that's, a performance in a commercial advertisement, I like to bring up the commercial, listen to it, hear whether there's a vocal over it or not, how long it's playing, and then really understand what I'm looking at, and then start to answer the questions that are posed to me. But essentially for years and years, the questions are, are we paid everything that we should be? And the tools are developing and will continue to develop on how to answer those questions.
So it's funny that Excel is the primary. I mean, it's funny and perfect that Excel is the primary tool, because I imagine that's the case for all of us, really. But you did mention Power BI, you did mention Tableau. And Kristen was talking a little bit about kind of UGC platforms, Spotify. So I do have a question. I'm going off script. So we got UGC / let's say web-based platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, Instagram. We've got broadcast data or broadcast data. And then we have OTT platforms, SVOD platforms. How do you look at those three sources or even other sources? And this is for anybody who wants to answer this. And like, how does one maybe affect another or drive your decisions, valuations, concepts, business growth, generally?
Yeah, so I can maybe take a stab at this question. And again, like everyone else, very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. So we don't just do, we do a great deal of valuation that drives a lot of our business, but we also do a lot of work for the major music publishers. And we've also valued so many production music libraries over the years. And one of the questions that we get a lot have to do with audits of the PRO statements and also budgeting and forecast questions. If you add another program, how much you're going to earn in terms of performance income, or if you're moving from one network to a smaller network, what does that mean in terms of your change of earnings? So we get a plethora of different questions. And one of the questions we got was, how can you use the data from Facebook to create a direct license with Facebook and this client in question who happens to is a significant production music library. So what we did was we took the streaming data from a sample of UGC shows on Facebook, and we applied the YouTube per stream rate from the PROs, and we thought that would be a pretty good proxy for Facebook.
So you applied the YouTube rate to Facebook in proxy.
Right. Okay. As a proxy, because we did, and then we built out this rate card essentially, where we approximated the number of cues by counting background cues of similar programs for which we had cue sheets. That was a lot of reality shows and children's shows. And then we made assumptions about the number of episodes per year. And we also calculated the duration of music from a sample of UGC shows on Facebook. And then for purposes of the exercise, we assumed 100% ownership of the music, knowing that it could be downward adjusted for the specific publisher. And then by putting it through this rate card, essentially we had a program estimate of what that user generated show could direct license annually on Facebook. And we did the same exercise with Netflix, except with Netflix, we didn't have, we couldn't develop a per stream rate because the streaming data isn't available. So we built out the rate card for a show that runs on multiple seasons using the same inputs except for streams, and built around big, medium, and smaller shows. And those cutoffs are pretty, you can tell what they are when you look at the PRO data. So in terms of mixing and matching all these different sources. So there was the PRO data, the UGC Facebook streams, and then what Netflix shows were earning on from a given PRO. So we created these rate cards essentially, and that helped us develop and answer some of these questions for our client.
So that's really interesting. Okay, so the UGC platforms don't generally use cue sheets. So whereas we've got Netflix, let's say, or a broadcast or cable, they're going to use cue sheets. So Luis, and again, you guys, I'm sorry, I'm totally going off script, but sorry. Luis, in the UGC world, we really are relying on fingerprint detections, right? Fingerprints and detection mechanisms. I imagine you're using those as well for radio, for television, but what do you do when there is no cue sheet and you're solely focused or relying on those types of detections?
Yeah. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So I can give you an example of what, for example, what we do on YouTube. And from the perspective of using purely technology and there's no cue sheet, generally speaking, I believe you cover a broader scope than when you rely only on cue sheets. Why? Because let's assume we have all the catalog from a specific library, label, or a composer, and we, in an agnostic way, we simply monitor the videos against that catalog without knowing anything else. That way, we are able to find probably surprises for these people, things that they were not aware. And that not only apply to UGC platforms, by the way, but also applies to broadcasts, especially for ads, for example, and trailers and commercials. But yeah, from what we can see, is that using that way of monitoring and using the data, the video, sorry, we are able to detect and essentially unlock revenue for people.
Mm-hmm. All right, so sticking with BMAT. So BMAT's developed a suite of apps that are intended to optimize operations and increase revenues. Can you tell us about those and how they work?
Yeah, definitely. So yes, actually, it's pretty much in line with something that Kristen mentioned before, that on top of everything, BMAT historically has been known for being a monitoring company focused on tracking music and on broadcast, TV, radios. We now covering some the digital space as well with YouTube and other platforms. But the majority of our work goes, and especially for production music libraries, composers and publishers, goes in the broadcast world. And as you said, we use our fingerprint to detect what music is played on what TV show or what commercial. And because of the way we do it, which is, as I described before, and there's many different ways that our clients can leverage on the data, starting from the very basic, which is to drive business decisions. So for example, on the creative side, so to decide what kind of music is working in certain territories, for example, and therefore what to put efforts in developing that kind of music. Until, for example, just finding or discovering who is using the music, to find out if there is, of course, a license or an unlicensed usage, or who to approach to promote your music. That's also another usage. But also, and besides driving business decisions, of course, sorry, I forgot to mention, but also for marketing purposes, it's really, really helpful as well. Just to show videos of where the music is played, or to track campaigns, marketing campaigns, or campaigns that launching music that can how they are doing in these territories. But mostly, and probably the biggest part is that the data is used to unlock extra revenue and to make sure that everything is paid correctly, either to audits, distribution statements, or to proactively claim. So for example, in the US for ads, or just simply to find out unlicensed usages. In some cases, we have clients who find an unlicensed usage for a commercial, and that unlocks a new license that just pay by itself, everything.
Very good. So Connor and Kristen, in terms of gap analysis, so we know we've got a detection, or we've identified, it could be even electronic program guide or a fingerprint detection, that something, there has been a use, but we're not seeing it on the PRO statement. What are your strategies to deal with this and to collect that money?
I can hop in first. You know, I like to understand exactly what's going on with the use to first identify, is this something that actually should get paid, right? So you really have to understand how ASCAP pays, when they should, and I like to leave a reasonable delay between, you know, when the expectation to be paid is, and, you know, maybe leave a couple quarters just in case things are late, because we know that they can be. We are constantly sort of ranking and prioritizing by value the potential prospects we have to you know, make sure that we're going to get bang for our buck if we're going to chase things down. And you know, I look at the reporting history from the client and the source. I look at the registration, and essentially, you know, if we can provide sufficient backup to ASCAP and BMI or any PRO that something should be paid and hasn't been paid, I think we're relatively successful. But checking all those previous boxes beforehand to make sure that I'm providing all accurate data on something that should be paid really helps. I sort of look at it as it's a collaboration between us and the PRO, you know, trying to reach the same outcome. If I can provide them with enough backup to make the identification and pay, then it can usually happen.
Yeah, we do the same. I mean, we're looking at pivot tables and analyzing our PRO data and, you know, the Q sheet data that we have. And there is always a gap in, okay, we think we're going to get paid for these episodes this quarter, and then where is that revenue? And so it is a communication line between our team and our analysis and the PROs, and like sometimes the production companies and networks, like, where are the Q sheets? Did you turn them in? The PROs are saying they didn't get them, and you're saying you did turn them in. Like, are they missing? You know, so there is a lot of still a manual process for it, and it's really annoying because we're just constantly chasing revenue, and payments are delayed because of it. So, you know, again, like going back to the, like what I first talked about of some of our processes are still so manual and archaic. And I feel like that is one of them, like just having to do Q sheets and do our own pivot tables and chase all of this money and ask the PROs, where is this money? Like nothing is really automated, like it should be, you know, and hopefully this is changing, and, you know, this conversation will be outdated in the next 3 to 5 years. But we have this new technology and everyone's trying to figure out how do we use it and how is it going to work. And I think like at the end of it, most of our revenue is still coming in from like traditional models like PRO revenue and sync licensing. And so we're still kind of at the baseline of like we have to focus on our main clients and our main revenue source, but then explore all these other options and figure out ways to get paid easier and faster and track in a more efficient way. But you know, it's just like bridging the gap of what everybody knows versus where we're headed. And sometimes there's like a big lag in that, which is what we're seeing. So yeah, it's
Okay.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Sorry.
If I could,
Wait, Nari, I definitely want to hear this, but I want to hear I have a question and it's kind of for you. So here they are with they have to spend $100 in some cases to collect $1. What should they be doing?
in terms of,
It's so manual.
yeah, it is incredibly manual, and we conduct these huge audits actually, and where we use the Q sheets, and for a given show we'll identify the publishing clients, and you know, we'll match up the Q sheets to the PRO statements. We'll focus on high value networks, and then we'll select a sample of dates within a given quarter, and we'll get who's watching TV airings. And you know, it's just as Kristen was saying, it's an incredibly manual process. And then we'll use those sample dates and prorate for 100% so that it'll represent either the entire quarter or the entire year. So when you were asking about how to negotiate with the PROs and what we do, so you know, the strategies can differ, and also the receptivity can differ. So, and you know, I would defer a lot to my business partner, Barry Masarski, on this subject, who's had these conversations. And so sometimes it's just, oh, well, you just conducted this sample of 4 days, so how can that possibly represent the whole? And so we'll recognize what we missed for those 4 days, and that's not going to amount to a hill of beans. But on the other conversations, they'll acknowledge that this is representative of a quarter or of even a year, and they'll actually provide a guarantee above of, you know, X% above the PRO statement value on a quarterly basis. And so that we would call that, you know, a pretty good value add from that perspective. But the thing about this process is it's so heavily manual that you have to prove to the PROs that they're missing this every single quarter or year. And so that's when, you know, BMAT, we're working with them now actually to try to figure out how we can streamline this process and disintermediate having to get all those Q sheets. And then that way, and it's continuous as well. So that way it becomes a lot less manual, and you can just prove your case on a pretty regular basis to PROs.
So when Nari, when you're doing the valuation, you obviously are able to see the gaps in revenue, but you're primarily focused on what has been earned, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But do you, as you're doing valuations, kind of factor in what you know hasn't been collected but might be due?
Well, I mean, so we do have a sense of what is missing, and if we were to use this one giant library as, you know, representative of other libraries, we could say there is this gap, and we could add that on top of the existing revenue. The only question is whether collection for that gap is going to take place, and of course, that is always that big question mark.
Yeah.
Or if technology is going to be able to close that gap in the next, as Kristen was saying, in the next couple of years. So we would have to assign a probability that this gap could be closed. And right now we do like to just work on what we can see And that is the historical revenue. So
That's fascinating. So, okay, Luis, are PROs, do PROs give kind of priority to BMAT data in their decision to capitulate and pay when there's a gap, when something has not been?
Yeah, that's the 1 million question always.
Yeah.
That's definitely they do in some cases. Actually, I was listening to Connor, Nari, and Kristen about it, and I can see actually differences in how the PROs treat these claims. For example, in the US and in Europe, and within Europe, actually, there's also differences between local PROs. So, just an example, our data, our clients can use our reports to claim unpaid usages. I'm talking about in-show unpaid usages, by the way, just to be clear. And they are accepted and paid straight away. I mean, not paid straight away, they have to be checked, of course, but they are accepted directly by, in this case, by GEMA, for example, in Germany, and also PRS. We have been successful with PRS. We're working more and more with other PRS, but we don't find the same situation, for example, in the US, where our data is accepted. I mean, it's not a no, especially because we provide the video evidence of every match. So it's hard to say no when you provide that. But the answer typically, and to some extent makes sense, of course, they start asking for things. They start asking for the Q sheet. They start asking for data that, of course, is needed to pay. We understand that. But in some cases, we are actually asking or claiming the unpaid usages because probably there is no Q sheet. So then you are probably in a non-ending story there. But yeah, we are working for that. We are in this case, for example, we are working in the US to have the PRS accepting the data, same as GEMA and PRS. It's a more tedious process of everything that has been discussed here, asking for Q sheets, asking for more information. But yeah, we think it's the data in itself is not a problem, and actually we haven't got any complaint in that aspect so far. Typically, it's taken for at least as an inquiry. Then if it's used to pay, it's another story. Mostly also because we work with over 100 CMOs around the world, and they already use our data to distribute and to pay. So it makes sense that they value our reports.
So
Yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the detection data is sort of a key part in showing, the issue. And, we use detection data to make claims for commercial advertisements with ASCAP. And I can tell you from doing that manually versus doing it with detection data, we're 10x what we would submit to ASCAP now. So the future really is this recognition. Yeah, you sort of need the backup. You need the Q sheets. Best case scenario is that there's a production or a show that on a ASCAP licensed census channel that just simply hasn't reported. And then, we see that in the BMAT data, we unlock the flow of the reporting and then we get paid. But a lot of the issues that we see aren't that cut and dry.
Are you guys focused on the rolled up titles or the generically retitled works as you're doing your statement analyses?
Those are definitely it's a curveball, isn't it?
It is.
We're a production music library, so all of our works are interpolated works. They shouldn't be rolled up as cues, but sometimes they are. And we've gotten better and better over the years as we're registering the works before they're released. Now 10 years ago we might not have been. It's becoming less and less of a challenge as our registrations are getting better, but that is sometimes the next step. Once you find something is unpaid, it's because maybe it has been paid as the rolled up queue, but you don't have the one-to-one that payment's been made. So
I can also speak to rolled up queues as a big problem because we do not do that. We register all of our titles individually as they should be registered, but we do a lot of custom music for other clients, networks, production companies, and they're adminned by other publishers who roll up queues for custom music. and then, you know, potentially retitle them or reuse them somewhere else and register those titles. And it is a nightmare for collecting for us. Like, we do collect, but we can't really, it's based on composer and usage versus title. And so we can't really see what music was used in that roll up. And then we also have a hard time collecting other sources of revenue. Like, if we are able to collect neighboring rights or the performance rights on the neighboring side, we are not able to do that with rolled up cues in most countries. So if it was actually registered as a title, then, and it was used on a cue sheet properly and in these programs, then we would be able to collect that revenue, but we're sort of cut out of it when they're rolled up. So,
And Kristen, I'm not sure if you do this too, but if I see a rolled up cue on my ASCAP statement, sometimes I can go into ASCAP portal, pull up the cue sheet, and I'll find the originally delivered cue title, not the roll up, on that cue sheet to then give me the information that I need to know which work it is. But that's highly manual too.
Right. And then but it's not up to us to do that. Like, we can check on our side, be like, oh yeah, this track, but then it's still not registered that way. So then we're still not able to like report that data in Brazil or in Spain or wherever and say, hey, we should be able to collect the performance of this side on the master side. But they can't, there's no data there to report on because it's not collected on the PRO level in that way. So it's tricky, but
So
I don't like rolled up cues.
Yeah, you don't.
Not
That's
a
so
fan.
weird. No. So Kristen, you mentioned neighboring rights. Are you all assigning ISRCs to the sound recordings?
Yeah, that's a big thing right now, actually. And Ray, who's on our Zoom, I feel like you should be talking about this, but he is the one doing all of this project for us. And, you know, obviously we are direct in certain territories, mainly the US and UK. And they do matter here, but they really matter internationally, particularly like we're working in Germany and they require ISRCs now to register and collect. So it's a huge project for us to find missing ISRCs and also very manual, you know, like we have to get them from the labels we rep or we assign our own. And we also work with, you know, distributors and distribute to the DSPs, and then we are assigned ISRCs from that. But yeah, it is still important and something that we're actively doing now.
There's a question in the chat that I think somebody should pick up. And the question is, what is a rolled up cue?
So the on a cue sheet, if you've got a composer working for a show and the cues are created for that show, generally the titles might not be very descriptive. You know, it's, you know, intro, chameleon crawling on a branch. If these works aren't already in distribution through a production music library, this first time that the PRO is seeing this registration is on the cue sheet. They will roll up all of the cues with the same publisher and composer into one background cues that, you know, might be, you know, Discovery Channel Shark Week cues. And that is acceptable. And it helps with the processing of a cue sheet. But for production music works like ours that are in distribution that are used in many different productions, those titles exist on their own. They're also called interpolated works. They should not be rolled up, but sometimes the PROs will roll them up against the best practices, and that's where we see issues.
There's another question that I like, and I want to ask it because I'm curious. I'm curious about how each of you will respond to this question. So in terms of global collections for performance, mechanical, and neighboring rights, what's the hierarchy of importance? ISRC, ISWC, IPI, and ISNI. I have my own vision. I have my own view on this. So I'm really curious about for you all what that is.
What is yours, Abby?
The ISRC is the most important. And the reason I think the ISRC is the most important is that's the thing that can be tracked, traced, identified with fingerprints. Everything else is embedded in that sound recording. The work is embedded in the work is the information about the publisher and songwriter. if you know the sound recording, you probably know the title of the recording, you probably know the artist, excuse me. So to me, if you have the ISRC, you have a bridge to every other identifier you need. That's for me. You guys, what do you think?
I agree. Part of the reason I agree is that I don't have ISWCs for a healthy portion of my catalog. They either haven't been assigned or, we're unable to find them. So that's sort of one of the things on my list, is to track down as many ISWCs as I can. So I've got ISRCs for every track in my catalog, and that's the only thing I can really rely on as a unique identifier for an asset.
I mean, I don't have a super strong opinion on this particular question, but I would agree, like, ISRCs are the most important. I think IPI is also important. Yeah, we're not as focused on ISWCs, but everybody sort of needs their own set of data in different countries and different territories. And it's like when you're doing a bank transfer, it's like, what's the IBAN? And we're like, we don't have that in the US. It's the same with data, and PROs and different collection societies are focused on different data points. So we try to have as much as we can. But, at the end of the day, I would love if it just audio detection and fingerprinting was as accurate as possible. And then we just use that for all of our data, like if it all goes back to the master, then and song, then it would make our jobs a lot easier instead of trying to collect all this data, for different territories that
it could all be replaced with a unique fingerprint, right?
Right.
That would be helpful, wouldn't it? Okay, so Luis, BMAT has been pretty heavily focused on broadcast performance detection. What are BMAT's plans to develop what tech to detect performance in audiovisual, like SVOD, OTT, UGC, other platforms?
We definitely are making moves in that direction. And I mean, when talking about VOD or OTT or well, mostly VOD, especially the platforms that have ad-supported tiers, we have to distinguish between well, in-show. I don't think it's the right term in this case, but let's for everyone to understand, we have to talk about in-show to detect music of the shows of the series, movies, and any of the visual work, and then we have the ads on these VOD platforms. For the former, we are in a blocking position, and mostly because legal constraints. We have the platforms who are the ones who have the performance information of the shows. Legally, they have to share this with the PROs and other societies, but not with anyone else. They don't have to do it with anyone else. We have access to this data anyway. We have access to the performance data in some countries because we help some of the societies to do the VOD distribution, and therefore we get the data. But we're limited in the usage we can do of that. Very, very limited. So that's not a way we can go, unfortunately. And in terms of applying technology to use that, it's very easy to detect the music of a show. We already have technology and tools to generate cue sheets automatically whenever we have a video, and even to send that automatically to any society. That's all in place. The problem here is how to detect and how to get these videos, and that is the question we are trying to resolve now and to tackle. And then on the other side, what we are focusing on detecting ads in these VOD platforms. We find that an easier way to go, and also something that we're seeing as well, by the way, is that we see ads licensing. I'm talking in the US, having previously Numerator and now Vivix data. We see the number of ads licensed by Vivix Numerator going down, meaning that it looks like it's increasing the licensing and the broadcast. And it's not, we don't have data, but we assume that one of the things that has impact that, especially in the US, is the emerging ad-supported tier VOD platform. So we have a focus now in detecting ads in these platforms, awaiting for the PROs to come up with with a methodology to pay this. And we are giving the first steps in terms of detecting that, but so far so good. It's been very successful, and hopefully soon we can bring some news in that aspect.
So Nari, actually, that makes me wonder, are you at your firm, are you tracking trends in ad revenue, not just broadcast, like broadcasters or cable networks or whatever, but actually on the internet side? Is that an important?
Well, we're more focused on broadcast revenue because that tends to be higher paying from a PRO perspective. But from a valuation perspective, actually, this is sort of a slight detour, but the type of analysis that we're looking at now that we didn't necessarily before is the earnings by release year and by product type within the release. Because one of the prevailing theories about production music is that you constantly have to replenish your catalog by releasing new music and new sounds so that it's always updated and fresh. And so when we're valuing a production music library as an asset, and this is as an asset as opposed to a company, which is a different set of considerations, and we're asked to do both. But if it's an asset, it's really the music that's been written up until this point and doesn't consider music to be written, which would be more of a company valuation going concern. So in that case, what we want to do if we're looking at the past is look at the earnings by release year and by product type and see what the life cycle is. And that way we can trend out based on that life cycle, what the future earnings are going to be for that pre-existing content. And so this is a type of analysis that we didn't necessarily have available to us. The data wasn't available to, and the reason it was actually posited to us was for a totally different reason. It was more for product development reasons. So is it true that the newest music is actually earning the most because it's the newest sounds? And what we found was, interestingly enough, sometimes it was music that was released 5 years ago that was earning the most money. And so that would have, you know, implications for product types or what would be written going forward. But in terms of the valuation, just to go back to that, by looking at those life cycle curves, it helped us forecast going forward. And that became, you know, that was on top of, oh, let's look at the blanket licenses and the needle drops and the performance and see the ratio between the blankets and the performance. That'll help us forecast going forward. So we had all those tools available, but seeing the release years was another layer of analysis that has helped us.
So you just said that in some this, I don't know if it was one case or many cases where cues that were 5 years old were the ones that were generating the most revenue. Why? Were they getting the most placements? Were they placed in the most lucrative?
Yeah, they were getting the most placements actually. So it wasn't necessarily that they were in one show and that show was getting rebroadcast year over year over year. There was something about those particular releases from those years, and it was older music. It was just so interesting because no one would have predicted it. And that was just earning the most money because it was getting the most placements. So it might have been just that span of music that they happened to just hit particularly right with respect to producers. But
that, like, could you make an assumption that this work that has been doing really well for the past 5 years is going to do well for another 5 years?
Yeah, I think so, because we look at the curves, and if the curve is declining very slowly, then that means that it's likely to continue earning for the foreseeable future. So again, as a publishing asset, that becomes really valuable. And for the company asset as well, I mean, because it's still the same revenue, it's just that you're adding on more and more.
Thank you. That's really interesting information. I'd like to talk really quickly before we get into the question, the panel questions about, are you able to determine what metadata tags I think specifically, maybe actually all of you, what metadata tags lead to placements and performance income? And are you tracking that?
Well, we want to, and we have plans to, and on this topic of harnessing big data, you know, what we want to do is prove the anecdotes that we've heard from the past 5 years from the subject matter experts with hard data, and then try and extrapolate those and take them further and automate some of these things. So, you know, anecdotally, like, we know that something that's not tagged well isn't going to come up in search on our site. So we've got the required tags, and we've got dependencies that are required for tagging. But you know, in terms of whether genre is more important than mood, we're starting to be able to look at things like that with sort of heat map things on our site and tracking user data on our site for the first time, because of the structure of having a data lake and a place to store all this stuff and the methodology to then extract it.
Is there this is for Connor and Kristen specifically, is there a correlation between tracks that are most, let's say, downloaded from whatever you're using and then placed? Like if it's most downloaded, is it also most placed?
You want me to answer? I would say yes, generally. But you know, I think it's a little difficult to track because we have our own search engine and then we upload our music to so many platforms and it's getting delivered to so many different people on different platforms, and then they do their own searching and downloading. So like, for example, if we have blankets, then our music just goes into their system and then they use it as they need it. So we can't track their metadata. We can only track like their usage and the reports they give us. So we're sort of limited on our own like data based on their data. But we can of course track our own search trends and our own website. But I think metadata is generally, as a baseline, always so important. Like you need to have the basic information, and we tag and track all of our like, you know, specific like moods and styles and keywords and all that. But I think with AI and searching through with AI, it's less important for moods and those kinds of tags, just because it's going to find similar sounding tracks instead of similar moods and styles in text. So yeah, like we are tracking it, and I would say like probably in the other systems that our clients are using, their own systems, the more tracks are downloaded, the more they're going to get used. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. I'm gonna start going through the questions in the chat. So first one is, this is, I believe, for Luis. How does BMAT fingerprinting differ from TuneSat?
Well, I can give you a direct answer. What is different, because I haven't seen results on testing TuneSat fingerprint. But what I can tell you is that our fingerprint has been tested in different moments and has been tested as one of the best in the industry, and that includes not only TuneSat but also other providers and other companies around. One of the differences, besides the technology, meaning that which basically helps in detecting more, we also tune our system to be very sensitive and therefore to allow more usages to go through. To give some context, audio fingerprint technology works by comparison, by the way. It's not a binary thing. It's more like how similar this sounds to this other piece of music, right? Of course, that is great but that also leads to many false positives and many incorrect detections. And our system, we set the threshold of that similarity very, very low to allow more matches. Also, we put in place measures to make sure that we remove those, sometimes with more or less success, but that's one of the reasons why we detect more than TuneSat, besides the technology.
Okay, thank you. Can you do melody recognition or solely fingerprint recognition?
Say it again, sorry?
Does BMAT have melody recognition technology?
Not sure if I know.
Like if I hum a melody, if I sing a song right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, the current fingerprint technology is not that robust for that case, but we have a specific technology to detect those covers. Actually, we are now developing, improving that technology with AI to make it even better.
Oh, cool. That's exciting. There's a question here. I don't know who this is for. Maybe all of you. Is there any way to detect YouTube pre-roll advertising for commercial claims? So I think the question is there a back end at PROs for pre-roll commercials on YouTube?
I think no. The PROs are not tracking it.
Okay.
that I know of. But as Luis described earlier, maybe BMAT can and start providing that information.
We are actually making tests to detect that in different regions of the world. We do that in some countries, and now we're exploring other territories. I mean, the technology, it's there to do it. But yeah, it's possible, it's feasible.
That's exciting too. All right. Here's the question. If moods aren't as important, what is most important in tagging?
I guess I should take that because I said it. Of course, moods are important. I think, people are still manually searching and going to like our search and typing in what do they need. So we are tagging all of that stuff. But I think, for us, what's more effective, like typing in pop and upbeat versus like finding, let's just say as an example, the track you really love, this Beyonce song, because she's always my example, and like popping that into an AI like search and finding similar sounding songs, because hopefully if the AI is good, it's going to capture that style and that like type of pop and that rhythm and that like beat, and so that I think for us is like maybe more effective than just finding like all the pop songs in our catalog. But we still tag them because people do still search for them in that way. But I think it's maybe becoming less, at least for us, it's less. And I think for clients, it's also becoming less. But of course, you need your basic contact information in the metadata, like how do they find and track this track, just as a very basic starting point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's another question. For BMAT, are you finding issues where multiple songs use the same splice loops, causing multiple false detections? Like, I think the question or the statement is, yes, you must be. So the question is, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that I mean, in full transparency, that's an edge case for the technology. Essentially because of how it works. It works by similarity. So the less unique a song it is, or a piece of audio, the less chances to get different results on that. So if a loop is used within, actually we did a test a few years ago with I mean loops, but also with the stems and similar sounds that are used in one song or another. And the results were that not only our technology, but also the watermarking technology, basically any recognition technology struggles to detect these cases as of today. Hopefully, we're taking steps in this direction. AI can help in improving that, but we'll see.
Right. All right. So I didn't.
Abby, oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
There's a question, and there's just I think this is an important question. I'm going to rephrase it just a bit, and I might throw it to you. It's in the Q&A, so it's in the Q&A section. Right?
Oh, okay, thanks.
So can you? The question is, what steps basically are being taken to lobby for reforms to streamline payout and overall standardization of processes industry-wide? So Abby, because you're kind of tapped in there, would love maybe a zoomed out, whatever you can share there. But also what I'd like to maybe explore in these last few minutes is, brainstorm solutions, right? I know Connor mentioned earlier digital fingerprint, right? So maybe we can throw out like potential solutions to some of these problems too, based on tech, and we have Luis and so on. So Abby, I'll let you take that.
Okay, so reforms to streamline payout and overall standardization of processes. So I think those are like totally different things. So let's start off with standardization of processes. One of the things we do, well, with SysAC, there's been standard cue sheet harmonization, right? So there's an effort to make cue sheet information standardized, and also to include ISRCs, which we don't generally see here in the US, reporting standardization, metadata standardization, right? We all want to be using the same keywords to mean the same thing, or right? And then royalty, I think I said royalty statement distribution, or the fields that are present in royalty statements, we need standardization. We don't see it at all in the neighboring rights field. Like the statements that come in from neighboring rights CMOs around the world are different from CMO to CMO. So how do we deal with that? I think if there's a way, and that might be a WIPO thing. It might be, because there's SCAPRA, which is sort of the parent of the neighboring rights organizations, but I'm not sure what organization would make that move to attempt to standardize that. What do you all think generally?
I mean, I think it's hard to standardize a lot of these things because when you look worldwide, that everyone has their own way of doing it. And I think this is a good forum to start, like having these open discussions with people who are also involved in this, and doing that globally. But I think it's a tricky thing to try. We've all tried to standardize metadata and it like hasn't worked. And we have our like best practices that people mostly adhere to, but even just keywords in different territories are different than what we would use here, and how they classify music, But from a data perspective, I feel like, again, I keep talking about AI because we're really researching it and looking at ways to implement it in our business. And that's kind of what everybody's business is like becoming based on for like collecting, at least like for BMAT and TuneSat and whoever else. So maybe there's a better way to like streamline the process and collect properly. But in the end of it, it all has to be accurate, whether it's like a manually written cue sheet or the detection that's being made, on an AI level. So I don't know. I would love to find the same answer, but I think it's a difficult, and challenging thing to do.
So, okay. So in terms of lobbying, Morgan, one of the things that we tried to figure out was how do we bring this issue of retitling and rolling up of cues to the Copyright Office? How do we make it a Copyright Office issue? And I haven't been able to come up with the angle that makes it something they need to deal with. But there is something about PROs having to pay the right people, right? But from the policy standpoint, it's vague. And it's difficult. I think maybe the other issue we could talk about in terms of policy is unionization of composers. Like, do they want, songwriters and composers? Like, can we collectively bargain? Can we have health insurance? That kind of thing. Those are policy issues you may want to, I don't know, look at.
Yeah, not to open a big can of worms because we're also over now, but looking at these strikes that are happening now, I think the same thing, like, well, what's going to be the outcome of that and how is that going to affect our business? And, what are we getting paid from the streamers? And, we have similar issues, but no one on our side is really striking. And it's like, are we ever going to? How does that work as an industry,
All right. Well, I think that might be it.
Right.
Connor, you would come off mute. Is there anything you want to say, Connor, just from your perspective? I know you guys have done a lot of stuff in that world as far as
in terms of standardization.
Yeah, just your thoughts on just your thoughts on.
I do have one thought, and I was a part of the CISAC cue sheet harmonization working group, and a big part of that was adoption and rolling it out worldwide. And we still get cue sheets from clients that aren't really great or easy to process for us. So I think that if technology can make things easier for the people that are creating these cue sheets, for instance, then that's one answer. It's just make it a no-brainer that it's easier to do it in the right format with this piece of technology. Whether that's audio recognition, listening to your program and automatically creating a cue sheet. I think that's one of the answers to get things better for everyone.
Thank you. Oh, we're out of time. This was a really, really, really great conversation. I'm sure we could have gone on for another 30 minutes to an hour with no problem. Any last thoughts from any of our panelists before we excuse you all for the day? Great. All right. Well, again, big thank you to all of our panelists, Abby, Louise, Nari, Kristen, Connor. Amazing stuff. Thank you guys so much for your expertise and knowledge. Really appreciate you sharing everything that you could with us today. And thank you to everyone that joined us to listen in and learn some stuff. I hope it was helpful. Hope it was educational. Again, I know I learned something, so I hope you guys did too. Thank you all. We will see you next time. Have a great rest of your day and week, and we'll see you soon.